Good morning, good evening, and good night. Anytime that you might be watching this or just listening to this, I am the calm reader. And tonight, I will be reading Bendy, the Lost Ones, an original novel by Andrew Crest. Prologue. Wally. Late nights were my favorite time of the day. I like the empty halls, the darkness, no people running about like chickens with their heads cut off. It's just a job, I think to myself. Why do they have to get so worked up over a job? I liked how my footsteps echoed, but I also liked putting on a record or turning on the radio and letting the music play while I emptied trash cans and mopped the floors. Sometimes I'd even do a little dance with the mop. Mop dances are fun. I ain't no Fred Astaire, but then again, he ain't no Wally Franks. Now that's not to say there weren't strange things about working late, but if old Wally knows one thing, he knows that folks like having their secrets, and it makes them feel special. Never understood that myself. What you see is what you get with me. Those were secrets here at Joey Drew's. I ain't no fool, but I ain't no detective. So I keep on my own business, even when the new renovations started. When they brought up the theater next door, even when the pipes had begun making strange noises all hours, sometimes almost like a creature moaning away somewhere. It was all never mind for me. Made life interesting. New halls to keep up, all swell like. New offices, and sure, new sounds too. Took more time to clean though, and my muscles did ache more and more these days. The missus always said we should retire down to Florida already. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Let me explain this one last time to you, you thick-headed lunks. I don't want to see one darn scratch on this thing when you get here. Got it? Yes, sir. Of course, sir. I overheard conversations all the time in this job. Not by being around a corner or in another room. No, folks sometimes seem to forget I can hear in the first place. They just talk or argue with me standing right there doing my job. Oh, Wally didn't mind. Folks did what they did, and just like I did what I did. Normally, I wouldn't have been thinking about it too much. But this time it was different. This time, well, I could have sworn that I was listening to the booming frustration of one Thomas Connor, and I could have sworn the fellow had recently been fired. Maybe I was wrong, though. Wouldn't be the first time, as the missus always points out. Don't yes sir me, just do your job. And sure enough, it was him, or at least his chest, as I crashed right into him turning a corner. What the... Thomas backed off, sputtering. Sorry about that, Thomas, I said, casually brushing myself off. Bumping into folks happens sometimes. Wally, you're here late, replied Thomas, glancing over his shoulder, not really making eye contact. I really got eye contact from folks. I didn't mind it. I didn't want to get in the way. My job was to make the way easier, not harder after all. Not really, I replied. Don't much think he'd want conversation. But he didn't want to walk away, so I did my best. Come up with a question, then Wally. That ain't a hard thing to do. You're back on the playbill then. What? Asked Thomas. The man seemed distracted. Your job. You get your job back? Mr. Drew hired you again? Well, he had no choice, replied Thomas, still thinking about something else. He laughed then. We both had no choice. I nodded. I didn't understand what he meant. After all, we all have choices. But folks like when you nod. Sets them at ease. Thomas turned and then began to walk off into the darkness of the hallway. Now, I always liked the dark. Felt like a cozy blanket to wrap myself in, even though I knew others found it scary and such. Never understood that either. Ain't nothing in the dark that ain't there in the light, most of the time. You moving that machine then? I asked Thomas. I just remembered about that now and felt like asking. The man stopped walking. He was silhouetted by the last light dangling overhead before everything got drowned in darkness. His shoulders rose, and his fists were clenched. Now, there was a man with some anger in him, I observed. Yep, some mighty fine anger. Machine. That large machine, the one that makes a mess of ink everywhere. Didn't mind cleaning up, but oh boy, was it annoying to clean up a messy smell. And it's back again half an hour later. Thomas didn't turn around. He stood there silent. I figured I should probably stay silent too. I was curious about the answer. I didn't always need one. I didn't always care for one. But I knew when someone needed to ask a question, even if it was more for himself than the rest of the people asking, Thomas Connor needed to answer this question. Yep, we're moving it, he finally said. Good, I replied. Don't know how that thing works, but ever since it arrived, there has been ink everywhere. Seems like it's being dragged along the floors by folks. The pipes also just out of control. Leaks and noises. I've been having a devil of a time fixing the damn things. You know, I don't even understand why this machine exists at all. No one bothered to tell old Wally anything. Yes, well, we're moving it, so you'll be happy then, interrupted Thomas curtly. That made no sense to me. Well, it's not like about my being happy. It's done, Wally. It's done. No, Wally was no fool. There were times he knew someone needed to answer a question, and there were times he knew that person had answered the question. And that was all they were going to say. That's all they needed to say. Well, good then, I said. I touched the tip of my cap. I always liked doing that. Wally salute. Thomas kept on standing under that one light. I could see that the muscles under his shirt tense and relax, and tense again. He raised his fist and moved his fingers, a bit like he was making sure they still worked or something. Yes, sir. That man definitely had some anger in him. Definitely. Then he took a step forward and disappeared into the dark. That's the way it is here. At night, into the light, for a moment, and then back into the dark. Saving money on electricity, I guessed. Saving money was a priority these days at the Joey Drew Studios. I've been told to keep my rags until they fall apart in my hands. I was good at taking orders. I appreciated them. I'd seen artists reach in their own garbage bins and pull out tossed pieces of papers to draw on the reversed side. I'd even seen lunches brought from home. I've seen pay stubs with lower and lower amounts and empty desks. I'd seen it all. I'd seen everything. Oh yes, old Wally sees everything, including the machine, including what made the ink on the floors, what dragged it far down the hallways and along the walls. You don't think old Wally has seen it? Old Wally sees all. I went into a small tidy office and picked up the half-full bin. I tidied the garbage into the bag and paused at a little light on the desk. I leaned over and clicked it off, saving electricity and all that, and I went back into the hallway and kept on about my business. Into the light for one moment, then into the dark. Never much understood why folks were scared of it. Ain't nothing in the shadows that ain't there in the light. Except, of course, when there is. That's when I'm out of here. Chapter 1. Just so everyone knows, I might just get to Chapter 3, and I might have to end this, sadly, but I will add more to this when I have more time. I pulled my jacket collar up around my neck and crossed my arms tightly over my chest. The air had an unexpected bite to it. There had been frost on the windows this morning, but did that dissuade my father from his plans today? Oh, no. What about the girl? I asked from my end of the table in our generally gloomy dining room. Light wasn't my father's favorite feature the best of the times. But some young, inexperienced architect had decided the windows in the part of the home ought to face north. Adding to that, father didn't enjoy large electrical bills, though he could very well afford to pay them. So any artificial help was left unused until after 5 p.m. in the fall. What girl? Father hadn't looked up from his paper and stabbed at his grapefruit blindly. That horse-driving girl. She'll freeze, I said. Father had shaken his head and stabbed the grapefruit again. It retaliated and shot back with equal force, covering his collar in pink juice. That ended the conversation there as he stormed off to change. To give him credit, The lack of consideration for the horse-driving girl seemed now possibly the correct way to go. She stood up there on the diving platform in a white bathing suit and white bathing cap, looking as comfortable as it was mid-July. I didn't understand how it was possible for her to not be completely cold to the bone, but I respected it. I turned to look at the audience in the bleachers. I hadn't at the time realized just how far Father's patrimony had planned. The hundreds of paid locals sitting in their summer best in the standards made me tug even harder at my own collar. I regret not bringing a scarf, but at least I wasn't them. At least I wasn't part of an illusion of the day. I turned and wandered back towards the camera and its operators. I've been shoot off once today, but I thought if I was more casual this time, and if I just happened to accidentally appear directly beside the two men, they might let me watch this time. They weren't filming it anyways, and they were still setting things up. And I told myself this time I wasn't going to ask any questions. I would just observe. I would just scram, kid. The one holding the film canisters. But I said scram. I turned on my heel. At least the heat rising in my face would keep me warm from the embarrassment I had. I pretended to have a great interest in the diving platform, as if I was going to check on the camera, had been part of a larger scheme to make sure everything was nearly ready for the shoot. I looked back at the girl standing casually at the top. She looked down at me, and I felt the need to say something, anything, be reassuring even if she seemed perfectly fine at ease. Everything is just fine, I said with a wave. She smiled and nodded. She was a sport, not one replacing her sister last minute like this. I'd never met Constantine Gray, but Molly was famous here in Atlantic City, and her father had been quite keen to get her. He kept a brave face when learning she was sick and her sister would be doing the dive instead. My father, such a brave man, buying up hotels, investing in nightclubs, all while the war ravaged on the other side of the ocean. When these men come back, they need to remember what they were fighting for. Yes, that'd be watered-down expensive drinks and girls in shiny costumes then. That's what this film was for, to remind everyone, not just the men who'd returned from war last year, but the women too, and their children, that they had sacrificed for. The chance to go on holiday on the seaside, to play games, to eat, drink, and be merry, to watch a girl dive into the water on the back of a horse over 60 feet in the air. A tourist film, Father had called it, hence the illusion the height of the tourist season was May to August. People came here for the warmth, not the bitter cold wind of the Atlantic in the mid-Octobers. So everyone had pretended it was summer. We already done some shots on the beach and boardwalk last week when it hadn't exactly been as cold. But today was the most excited about. If anything drew a crowd, it was horse diving at the steel pier. Also paying customers to attend did that too. I examined the platforms. I was always shocked by its appearance. It hardly seemed safe from an engineering standpoint. Skeptical wooden metal frame, bolstered by steel wires attached to the ground. I have to admit that my interests were more mechanical than structural usually. I still really wish someone would let me play with their camera. But all of that still fascinates me. How things were made, how they worked, how pieces of a puzzle came together. I'd walk along the boardwalk staring at the hotels built as a turn of the century. How do they do that with the old-fashioned tools of their day? The piers jutting out of the water fascinated me as well. They stopped there against the beating current and salt for decades. That's not normal, I said just then. My eyes had followed the length of the steel wire down from the top of the platform to the ground. The bolted metal square that had been held in place looked like it had been pried up. The fear welled up from deep inside me. Is that normal? I asked louder. No one was listening to me. Everyone had their own tasks to manage. The fear was growing a panic, too. This was not good. This was not good at all. No, we had to make time. We had no time for panic. This was time for action. I swallowed the feeling and looked for my father, but he was standing with the director, engaged in one of the regular heated debates. Father liked to fancy himself a creative type, who was just pragmatic to pursue the arts. I glanced over at the editor of the Atlantic City Press, standing just a ways off, watching the whole thing go down. Father didn't need any more bad press, but I also had more important things to take care of right now. I made my way over to the skinny young fellow with red hair and freckles leaning against the stairs of the platform. Hey, does this look normal to you? I asked him. He stared at me, wide-eyed. This happened a lot. I didn't feel like anyone of note, but I couldn't deny reality. Being the son of Emmett Chambers meant I was kind of my own celebrity. I hadn't done anything. I'd just been born to a rich man who owns half of Atlantic City. That bolt there, the wire. Does it seem safe? I pointed. The man turned and looked, and thank goodness. He said, moved towards it. I followed him. We looked down at it, then up at each other. No, that's good. As I thought, the fear turned inside me, but I held it at bay. Okay, so we should tell someone about this, shouldn't we? Steve, we should absolutely do something about this. Steve nodded. There are some tools at the stables. I can go get those. Do that, I replied. Steve ran off at a good speed, and I turned to look at my father. I didn't want to get him involved in this, but if there's something as big as a potentially deadly diving platform with a girl standing on top of it, she ought to know. Father, we have a problem, I said quietly. Not now, William. He replied with that sharp, clenched teeth response that I had heard far too often. Yes, now, Father. What's going on? Asked the director. I wasn't exactly being sorry, and I didn't want to be. People needed to know about the immediate danger. A bolt has come loose on one of the wire supports, I said. Gratefully, someone cared. A fellow named Steve is getting some tools, but we might need to get Constance down. You sent off the horse boy on some errands when we have to schedule to keep. Who the bloody heck is Constance? Asked my father. Seeing something so obvious, even the director looked taken back. The horse girl. She's still up there. Definitely not. We bring the girl down, the audience gets up and goes. Fix the darn thing, and we just do it fast. But she's in real danger, I said to his retreating back. That made a few of the others standing beside him look at me. My father completely ignored me. Instead, he gestured at the young man standing next to the newspaper editor. You there, he called out. The young man looked over his shoulder, then back again, then pointed at himself. Yes, you, stop pointing at yourself like that. Take the horses up to the girl. I started in utter confusion. The last thing we needed was a scheduled 1,000-pound horse on the platform right now. Do you understand me? That was the last thing I heard my father say as I rushed back to the wire. I saw Steve running with his small toolkit, big face as red as his hair. Good lad, at least someone else understands the gravity of the situation. Then do it. The final order my father gave me before I saw him huffing back in my direction. No! So now he cared. Or now he wanted to take his anger out on someone. It didn't matter. Steve pulled a giant wrench from his bag and stared at it, and then the loose bolt. He looked at me. I'll do it, I said. I was a fairly strong individual. Done no effort on my passport. Just another gift given me by my father. Sometimes I truly despise that I look like him this much. Steve now looked like a stiff breeze could blow him over. He handed me a wrench, and I thought my father ordered the other men milling about to surround me. I have to hide this from the audience, he said. He seemed more concerned about that than the loose wire on the platform. I hunched down beside the large metal plate and stared up. The platform shuddered dangerously, and I looked over to see that the horse was being taken onto the platform by a very nervous newsfellow. This was complete insanity on my father's part. If we didn't fix the wire, the whole platform could topple to the ground. I looked down as the splinters of wood from the pier cracked beneath the weakening plate. Get back to work. I began trying to wrench the bolt tight. I noticed that my hand was shaking just a bit. Breathe, I told myself. You just need to breathe. But even my own recommendable strength was not going to be enough. Steve, get some men and go to the fat side of the forest. I began to wrench the bolt tight again and noticed my hand was shaking a bit. Breathe, I told myself. Just fix it. But even my own considerable strength was not going to get me through this. Steve, get some men. We're going to go to the far side of the platform and push, I said, making brief eye contact with the man before returning to my work. Once again, Steve took me seriously. I could tell because Father was raging. Where are you going? To give Steve credit for understanding our dire situation, he ignored my formidable father, and soon he and a few other larger men were on the other side of the platforms. I nodded at them from the side, viewing them through the giant wooden beams, and they pushed. The difference between them was a matter of inches. Not feet, not yards, but inches was all I needed. The mechanical plate lay flush with the pier. I wrenched the bolt as tightly as I could with my shaking hand, reaching my own neck in the process. It hurt, but I kept going. Oh, for goodness sake, boy, you couldn't be any tighter, my father said, suddenly, right over my shoulder. Get up before some idiot out there figures out what's going on. I look up at him. From this angle, his face dropped down 7 or more than usual. He was still an intimidating figure, but down below he looked more grotesque than anything. I returned to the plate, but he was right. The whole system held together this platform was weak to begin with. A cheap way to get a woman and a horse into the sky, but at least she were wire was secured to the pier again. I stood up, and Steve and I exchanged a nod. Good fellow, that Steve. Right, let's get rolling, announced my father. I made my way back behind the cameras and looked up as the girl standing on the horse, it was all pretend, all for show, all for the camera. And yes, there really was a girl on a horse soaring through the air. Imagine that. Alright, so I am going to take a break, probably go to sleep, but I will resume from Chapter 2, from Constance. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and apologies for being quite tired, actually.